Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our final panel of day 2, which is our Congressional Roundtable. And we're going to get started with some messages from our sponsors. Our oceans and Great Lakes need champions in Congress, and we're very fortunate that there are a number of members that have been very supportive of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation and Capitol Hill Ocean Week by joining us as honorary committee members. Today, we're also very fortunate to have 3 members of Congress joining us. We have Senator Whitehouse, Representative Kilmer, and a little bit later, Senator Sullivan will be joining us. I want to introduce Juliet Alpern, the Senior National Affairs Correspondent for The Washington Post, who will be moderating our panel. Thank you.
Dan's on the far left.
Yeah. That's where Sheldon Norman is.
Here you go. Thanks so much for joining us here for this congressional panel at Chow. I'm joined by 3 very distinguished members of Congress. You're familiar with all of them, but I'll just give you a brief overview. I mean, anyone who deals with oceans who doesn't know Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has something wrong with them, so I'll just start with that. But as you know, he's a Democratic senator from Rhode Island and co-chair of the Senate Ocean Caucus. He is also a member of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee and plays a key role in crafting policies addressing environmental protection and climate change. In 2011, he joined with Democrats and Republicans to form the Senate Oceans Caucus to increase awareness of and find common ground on issues facing oceans and the coast. Then right next to him is Congressman Derek Kilmer, who's a member of the House of Representatives and the vice-ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee. I've just discovered that we went to the same college, but he's 4 years younger than me, so I'm already feeling a little behind. But that said, I'm gonna get over it. He also sits on the Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee, which oversees the budget for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And throughout his career, he's been an advocate for our oceans by working to secure investments that support sound science, innovation, and environmental protections. And then all the way, as Senator Whitehouse noted, on our far left, we have the Senator Dan Sullivan from Alaska, who's chairman of the Senate Commerce Subcommittee on Oceans, Atmosphere, Fisheries, and Coast Guard. He was sworn in as Alaska's 8th U.S. Senator. They're new enough that they still know where you rank in terms of representing the state in the Senate on January 6, 2015. Prior to the Senate, Dan Sullivan served as Alaska's Attorney General and Commissioner of Natural Resources, which is where I first got to know Senator Sullivan and tracked everything he was doing there on oil and gas and other matters. He served in the Bush administration, the George W. Bush administration, as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Economic, Energy, and Business under Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, with a focus on fighting terrorist financing and implementing policies related to international energy. And he has been working on a number of initiatives with his colleagues to address ocean issues, which is, of course, one of the first things I wanted to discuss today. I'd love to start, and I already see I'm very happy to see that we have tons of questions already, which I will be glancing through to figure out what we need to be grilling our members of Congress on. But first, let's start with the marine debris bill, because that's something which clearly is something that has already gained traction in Congress and has attracted bipartisan support. So in April, the Senate Commerce Committee passed this, the debris bill, which has recently been introduced, and there's a companion bill in the House. It would allow the NOAA administrator to declare severe marine debris events and reauthorize NOAA's Office of Response and Restoration's marine debris program through FY 2022. So I know both Senator Whitehouse, Senator Sullivan, you've been making the case for why we need this authority and reauthorization. Can you talk a little about why this bill is necessary in the first place, and what are its prospects for actually becoming legislation signed into law under this president?
Well, I'm not normally on Sheldon's left, so I'm going to take advantage of this. And go ahead.
In Rhode Island, we do marine debris cleanups with volunteers on their feet and with plastic trash bags. In Alaska, they do marine debris cleanups with tractors and dumpsters and front-end loaders, because so much of the problem is in the Pacific. So we had a really good hearing that Dan chaired in the Environment Public Works Committee that brought together Republicans and Democrats on an environmental issue in a way that those of you familiar with the Environment and Public Works Committee would know to be uncommon. And, but it really was strong. And the capstone of it was when Senator Inhofe of Oklahoma joined us, and I'll be candid, I looked down and I thought, oh boy, there we go. Just when it was going so well. But he came into the hearing and was rhapsodic about days as a young man on the Texas coast and the Gulf Coast. He'd driven down from Oklahoma, and he was there to spend the night on the shore with his flashlight and his folding chair to make sure that nobody ran over the little turtles as they were making their way to the sea. So I learned something significant that day, because he's been my nemesis on everything related to climate change, and now he's the newest member of the Oceans Caucus and a co-sponsor of our bill. So there you go. But it was Dan's leadership as chairman to hold that hearing that made this happen. That was his call, and he got this bill through his Commerce Subcommittee. So to Senator Sullivan.
Thank you. Thanks. And Juliet, nice to see you again. Well, look, I think this is one of these issues where, so I've only been in the Senate a little over 2 years, and the one thing I do mention when I'm back home, which is I try to actually get back home every weekend. My wife and daughters are living in Alaska, not out here, is that there is a lot more bipartisan work on important issues than you see. It doesn't always make the news. I think sometimes, you know, the conflict is a little more interesting and exciting for the media than a bipartisan bill that includes Sheldon Whitehouse and Jim Inhofe and literally everybody in between. And yet it's on a really important issue. Really important, not just for Rhode Island and Alaska. I told my staff I wasn't going to do the, you know, Rhode Island, Alaska size comparison. Here.
I thought we had a truce on that day.
But I will say, just for example, my state, we have 34,000 miles of coastline in Alaska. So we have more coastline in Alaska than the rest of the United States combined. And as Sheldon mentioned, most of the marine debris that comes ashore in the United States comes from the Pacific Ocean through countries in Asia. And so the importance of the bill is a number of things. It fully funds NOAA's and reauthorizes NOAA's marine debris program. It provides for an additional related program where states can declare emergencies from kind of major marine debris events like Fukushima or other kind of events like that. And I think Sheldon agrees, most importantly, it strongly encourages the State Department to get involved both at reviewing and analyzing and researching with NOAA the sources of the challenges and indirectly encourages them to undertake international agreements, which, believe it or not, on this issue, there's nothing in terms of any international agreement or treaty that relates to this issue. So we're going to have a hearing actually this week on the Commerce Committee. I think it's tomorrow, actually, and we'll have the top State Department official. I've already had very good discussions with the Trump administration State Department. I think they're very interested in this issue, and possibly, hopefully, we're going to be prodding them to pursuing the international route. But I'll kind of end my initial comments by just thanking Sheldon, because he said, hey, it's my leadership. I was the chair of the subcommittee, but he was the one who's really been pressing this, had a lot of discussions with me. So if there's an intellectual godfather to this movement and this bill, which has already passed out of committee, it's Sheldon Whitehouse. So I want to thank him for that. And I think the prospects, Julia, as you asked, of passing the Senate and the House are very, very high. I mean, when you have such a broad-based bipartisan coalition of senators, Republicans and Democrats, on a really important issue for the nation, I'm very confident we're going to get this passed.
Excellent. Thank you. And we'll try. We're going to mix the kind of high-minded bipartisan questions with the harsher questions, because as a journalist who I admire a long time ago once told me, Juliet, the good news, it takes care of itself. That's why reporters write about bad news. But you're right, it's very important to write about progress. So this is a question we got, and I should also mention to our audience watching online, you're welcome to submit questions by just using the hashtag #Chow2017, so hopefully we'll get some of those. But this is one that does talk about bipartisanship, but has a bit of an edge. The question is, how can those in Congress best work together to defend our treasured national marine sanctuaries from misguided meddling via executive orders such as that recently issued? And I want to broaden it out a little to say that, again, there's obviously a reassessment going on right now on marine monuments. I know Interior Secretary Zinke is, in fact, meeting in Boston, whether it's, I think today he's in Maine, but I think, it's tomorrow. He's going to be meeting with fishermen to talk about the New England Canyons and Seamounts National Monument, but also there are obviously marine sanctuaries where, have considerable bipartisan support. Could you all weigh in on what's the level of bipartisan support for some of these designations, and where, in fact, might there be bipartisan agreement for modifying these boundaries, or some real disagreement about how to do that kind of ocean protection?
I don't know. I think at the moment this issue is most likely to be settled in the courts, not in Congress. We have a president who has basically repudiated the monument designations of his predecessor, and the courts will face the question whether the marine monuments, the monuments authority of the president is unidirectional, or whether it can be ratcheted back by a future president. That has never been determined. I think it's probably a one-way ratchet, that once it's done, it's done. The public interest now exists in holding that land in public trust, or that part of the ocean in public trust, and it's settled. There's another legal question that is probably going to be answered in the case in Boston about whether the Marine Monuments Act can actually be applied in the oceans. And then there is the outcome of the specific litigation that fishermen brought with respect to the New England Monuments designation, which unfortunately had some troublesome characteristics in terms of not having been coordinated with the ocean planning process that was in place at the same time in the same area, and not having given the fishing community enough of a chance to weigh in, so that they felt that while they were participating very legitimately, very honorably in the ocean planning process, they suddenly got rolled without warning through the monuments designation. And that created some, I think, considerable ill will, which is now working itself out in the courthouse in Boston. And we'll just have to see where that goes. It's not really up to us to intervene in that piece of litigation. It's not even clear we'd have standing in it, but we're watching it with a real interest, and it really is important that Cash's Ledge and the canyons offshore be protected, because they're some of the richest and most special underwater areas off of our very heavily fished coast. So TBD.
I'd add, so I serve on the Interior and Environment Appropriations Subcommittee too, and we had Secretary Zinke in, and it was interesting to watch Democrats and Republicans sort of take turns saying, please don't rescind my designation. That wasn't just one side of the aisle saying that. Mike Simpson said, we have a national monument, please don't mess with it. And then Democrats said the same. Certainly the San Juan designation in my neck of the woods is an example of one that was not top down. It was bottoms up with a lot of community involvement, a lot of stakeholder involvement. And to the question, I think that is probably what has the greatest currency, is where there's a clear articulation of just how much stakeholder involvement there has been kind of across the ideological spectrum. I think that's pretty valuable.
Key message to future presidents: get the process right.
Got it.
Yeah, and I would say, I would agree with Derek's point. The key is bottom up, stakeholder engagement the whole way. And, Juliet, you mentioned bipartisanship. And the issue there on all those things, let's face it, it's harder to get to the right place or to the place where you think you need to be when you go through that kind of very engaged, very bipartisan, not top-down, not partisan process. And I think the monuments, or even to be honest, broaden it out, the agreements that we make as a nation are much, much more durable when you include the Congress, when you include stakeholders, when you include states, and when it's not done unilaterally. And I'll give you, so I think on some of these issues, it remains to be seen. I'll just give you one extreme example where I don't think it's worked. I'm very pleased that the president is actually trying to undo something that President Obama did, but you might know in Alaska we have the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas. Okay, when I had my first meeting with Secretary Jewell, I really encouraged her, hey, if you're going to do anything with regard to actions in Alaska, it's really important to engage with my constituents, with my state, with stakeholders, with me, with Senator Murkowski, with Don Young. Can I have that commitment? Yes. Okay, the day before Christmas of this year, we heard the rumor that the President of the United States was going to take the entire Arctic Ocean off the table for any kind of potential resource development. Some of you might think that was a good idea. In Alaska, that's viewed in a bipartisan way as a bad idea. We didn't hear one thing. I called the Secretary of Interior. I'd like to speak to the Secretary. I'm hearing a rumor that the President of the United States might be taking the entire Arctic Ocean off the table, the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas. And I reminded her special assistant, I've had many discussions with the Secretary, but she committed to me. She committed to me they would never do this. And she can call me back. Here's my cell phone. Never got a call back, ever. President of the United States did a big press conference, taking the entire Arctic Ocean off the table. My state's in a recession. We're losing jobs. We have a great track record of responsibly developing our resources. Not one outreach from anybody, to me, to Senator Murkowski, to Don Young, to our governor. That's the kind of thing that's not sustainable. So I strongly encourage the President, Trump, and Vice President to reverse it. So I think the key is sustainability, bottom up, not top down. Work with the Congress, even if you're not from the same party, if you want something that's sustainable. Otherwise, you're going to have this back and forth that we're seeing now, where you didn't really have the consensus that you need from the local community.
Right. And thank you so much for bringing up Arctic drilling. So obviously, right, we had an executive order where President Trump essentially reversed both that designation and the designation of some protections off the Atlantic that, again, President Obama unilaterally declared at the very end of his term. So I'd love to ask Senator Whitehouse and Congressman Kilmer, going forward, so, one thing that was interesting as someone who covers that is that, President Trump signs it and says, we're going to open it up. Secretary Zinke that same day said it will probably take about 2 years to even go through the planning to see whether they would have lease sales. And of course, there are economic factors that play into this. As folks who obviously have some reservations about some of this offshore drilling, whether it relates to those immediate habitats or to climate change more broadly, do you think we certainly have had some kind of we've had whiplash in the last few years between kind of these two presidents and their policies on it. Do you see a clear path forward when you look at both what's happening administratively as well as all these economic and scientific factors that get, put in there? Are there going to be a significant number of leases? Do you see that this is something where there's certainly a lot of publicity one way and another, but it actually doesn't change the situation on the ground? What's your sense of what happens?
I don't really know. I mean, I think I've got the opposite view about the merits of Arctic drilling than Dan does, but I 100% agree with him about process when you're trying to do these things. And you do build liabilities, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities into what your task is if you haven't gone through the exercise to get the process right in the first place. You sort of sign yourself up for a victory lap and you haven't done the homework to really win the game, and somebody can come and take it away from you afterwards. So I couldn't agree more with Dan about that. And I don't really know where this goes. I think, courts are going to need to settle what the authority is what authority a future president has to undo something that a president has done, and depending on what their authority was in doing it, that may vary a little bit. And at some point, one would hope that it would fall back to some scientific determinations. I have the more general concern that the fossil fuel industry has basically moved in and captured this entire administration. And they may dress up in the uniforms of the Navy, but they're more or less still the same pirates out there. They just got the chance to board the ship and run it. So I don't have a whole lot of confidence that this administration will pursue any science-based anything in this area. I think they've basically put the foxes in charge of the hen house here, and they're going to just want to do nothing but eat chicken.
There you go. And Congressman Comer, do you have any questions?
Have you used that line before?
No, but I got a good.
I want to write that down.
Now it's going to be over and over again.
Can you give me a minute? I just want to write that down.
Exactly. Luckily, this video will be archived.
I listen to his speeches on the Senate floor, so I usually know a lot of
there you go.
the Sheldon White House.
That's nice that you listen. He gives a lot of speeches. There you go.
He has no choice. He has to preside sometimes.
I don't know that I have a lot to add. I certainly share the concerns both from a wildlife standpoint and from a climate impact standpoint. I also don't think that this administration will move things in the direction of those values. Good. There are a number of bills that I'm a sponsor of on the House side that looks at both, whether it be wildlife designation or some limitation on drilling leases. Those aren't likely to move out of this House.
Got it. I wanted to ask something that all of you get a say in, which are the budget cuts that have been proposed. And I know that certainly you all have strong feelings about some of what we've seen coming out of the White House. Congressman Comer, when referring to the zeroing out of the Puget Sound program at the Environmental Protection Agency, you said Puget Sound is an iconic body of water that is vital to our economy and to who we are as Washingtonians. The president's budget does not reflect this. And that someone who saying that Trump had said that he would work on clean water and good jobs, that's not being reflected in zeroing out this program. Obviously, as someone a key member on appropriations, you get to weigh in. To what extent do you think Congress will reshape some of the very significant budget cut proposals we've seen coming out of the White House?
Well, I don't think the president's budget's going to be the budget. I guess that's the good news. The bad news is when your starting point is zero for a lot of these programs, even if it's funded at 80% or 90%, that could be characterized as a win, but it isn't. I think my primary concern is this is a budget that indicates to me that the president doesn't know the people I represent. If you went out to the coastal communities, if you went out to Westport in my district and saw firsthand the ocean encroaching on people's properties, there's no way you could zero out some of these coastal resiliency programs. You couldn't do it. If you met with the shellfish growers from my region, And if you met with people involved in the fisheries, you couldn't zero out funding for the recovery of Puget Sound. There's no way you could do that. I mean, and I think one of the concerns I have is not just in the dollars, but in the rationale behind the dollars. Mm-hmm. You know, if you look at, for example, the proposed zeroing around Puget Sound and the Chesapeake and others for that matter, it questions whether there is a federal role. Mm-hmm. And set aside whether there's a federal role to try to encourage regional economic development and maintenance of regional environmental values, you know, there's the Endangered Species Act. There's multiple species listed that call Puget Sound their home. There are, I think, 19 tribes, Native American tribes, that have treaty rights associated with being able to fish in those waters. That is a obligation, that is a contractual obligation from our government to theirs. And to suggest that there's not, therefore, a federal obligation to ensure that those treaty rights are worth something, I think is completely misguided. And I look at the budget as just a completely unserious proposal from the administration.
Senator Sullivan, I was curious, Congressman Comer mentions coastal resilience, which is clearly something that matters a huge amount to Alaska and has gotten federal support in the past. I'm curious about how you think this ongoing budget debate might affect that priority as well as others.
Well, look, let me just broaden it. I mean, I do think it's important when you look at the budget, you know, and some people don't like to talk about it, but you do try to every now and then have to step back and look at the responsibility that we have as a broader body in terms of our focus on fiscal sustainability. Doesn't come up much. I have 3 teenage daughters, and one of the things that I think should disturb everybody is right now we're, I don't know, 500 billion, 600. I mean, we are moving towards more $1 trillion deficits on top of a $20 trillion debt. Nobody talks about that, right? So there does have to be a focus on we cannot do this forever. Because we say we're funding it. Actually, the Chinese are really funding it by buying our T-bills. And so there has to be a serious discussion on that. My own view on that is the best way to start to deal with that so we don't leave this gargantuan debt on the next generation of Americans. Well, my kids and your kids and grandkids will be the first ones that have actually been given a worse opportunity in America than their parents have, is we have to start growing the economy, right? Have to start growing the economy. So to me, having that discussion, the president putting forward a budget that tries to balance within 10 years, it's an exercise. It's a little shocking, okay? But it's important. 20 trillion, we racked up $10 trillion of debt in the last 8 years. Nobody talks about it. I've been here, like I said, only 2 years, and nobody talks about this. And someday, we're gonna have what's called a failed Treasury sale, where nobody shows up to buy our T-bills. And you want to see some chaos for America? That day could happen. So I think we need to also have that discussion. But I don't disagree with Derek that Congress is going to write this budget. And one thing I do think that with regard to this budget is that, in my view, on certain rural priorities, which, by the way, are a lot of the people that supported the president, whether in Alaska or other places, there seems to be an extraordinary amount of cutting going on. So whether that is, in some ways, some of the climate resiliency. In my case, there was a program we worked on. Sheldon was very supportive of it. It was a bill that I had last year in the EPW committee that helped with the issue of water and sewer in Alaska and other parts of this country. Right now, there's over 30 communities in my state that have no running water or flush toilets. American citizens living in communities like they do in the third world. Patriotic Americans. So we had a program that tries to address this. Bipartisan in the EPW committee, and those funds are zeroed out. So we're going to put back the priorities that we think from a bipartisan perspective help with those kind of rural issues, with some of the environmental issues that we're talking about here. And that's important, and I think Congress is obviously going to put a lot of this back into the budget. But what the president and his team have tried to do on the broader issue of, really trying to tackle our fiscal challenges, it's an important exercise. There's this debate about whether the Fed is going to raise interest rates by a quarter as early as tomorrow. You'll see what we pay for the interest on that. It's going to be enormous. So we got to get our fiscal house in order. The president was trying to send a message from that perspective. I appreciate that. On the other hand, some of the rural needs and the different state needs, if there's a bipartisan way to move forward, we're probably going to add a lot of these back.
Got it. And we have an interesting question that I think all of you could speak to, which is, what strategies do you use to talk with your fellow Congress members who ostensibly don't care about the environment? So clearly, referring to cute turtles is a fantastic way to open the conversation. Are there, when you're trying to talk about something with a member who has an opposite perspective, what's your entree point? What are some things tactics you've tried that have connected with some of your colleagues? Are there ones that come to mind?
Making it local tends to help, and finding the things that people specifically care about helps. But I think local really is as significant as anything. It's one of the reasons I do all these visits to states where Republican senators come from, to try to understand better what the conditions are on the ground for them, and hear from their home state universities, and go to the coast if it's a coastal thing, go to the, wherever the vulnerabilities are. It's a big deal in New Hampshire when the moose, which is kind of the iconic New Hampshire mammal, is now having trouble getting through Calf Hood because the Fish and Wildlife folks find them with 10,000, 20,000 ticks on them. And the little calf can't make enough blood to support 10,000 ticks and its own body, and so they sicken and they weaken and they die. And that's pretty important. The Georgia marshes are pretty important. Sapelo Island and places like that really matter to Johnny Isaacson. And Dan has some of the most beautiful and pristine country anywhere in the world, and the local conditions, I think, in Alaska matter a lot to him. I also think that trying to find ways to explain that in this particular circumstance, the thing that you're arguing for as an environmental measure is welcomed by the local business community, will support the local economy, is not going to be a drag or a harm, and in fact, failing to protect is where the real harm lies. Those are the arguments that tend to make sense. The larger problem is that the fossil fuel industry is probably the biggest bully in the history of democratic politics, of modern democracies, I should say. And with the Citizens United decision, they just got the biggest artillery that special interests have ever had in this country, and they don't hesitate to use it. And they're not very thoughtful or restrained about the way in which they use it. They just want to smash everyone and everything that tries to cross their path, because among other things, it proves the political point that you don't mess with them. So, there's a huge difference between where a great many individual members are and what the leadership and this big industry will allow anybody to do. And that's a tension that I see day in and day out in the Senate. And don't believe for a second that when they say climate change is real and we support a carbon price, every single part of their political military establishment that does their lobbying is absolutely dead set against anything resembling a carbon price. And I know that because I've got the bill in the Senate, and it's API and NAM and Chamber of Commerce and the companies themselves all just dead murderously set against any of that nonsense. So don't believe that little flag that they flew. That's to distract you from where the real action is, which is their lobbying is 1,000% against doing anything on climate, and they are tough.
I think I think Senator Whitehouse's point around the economic impacts can sometimes bridge that divide. So I'll give you an example. We've just this week introduced a bill in the House focused on ocean acidification and trying to drive more research around ocean acidification. There are people who may question some of the science behind climate change, but they cannot question the fact that our ocean chemistry is changing. And we don't have a Democratic or Republican Pacific Ocean. We don't have Republican crabbers and Democratic fisheries. Like, they're all people whose livelihoods depend on us trying to address this issue. And so we've got a bipartisan bill because there's that acknowledgement that, in Western Washington, there's 3,200 people whose livelihoods are tied to shellfish growing. And, I had one of them say to me, we're third generation shellfish growers, and I'm worried that my kids aren't going to be able to continue on if we don't address this issue of ocean acidification. So that's to me, that's a core way of, from a kind of economic argument, connecting it. The other thing, and I don't know if we're going to be successful in this, but I actually think sometimes if we pull these policy issues out of the kind of high level and ephemeral and just talk about human beings, there's some benefit to that. Particularly as we've dealt with the issues around climate change recently, I have stood in Tohola, which is the lower village of the Quinault Indian Nation. And I stood with the president of the Indian Nation, Fawn Sharp. And she said, when I was a kid, the ocean was a football field away. And she said, now it's our front porch. She said, our village was built eons ago. We're below sea level. And as we've seen the sea level rise, and as we see more severe storms, we've persistently seen our seawall breach, and our village fills up like a bowl. And she said, we're now one of 4 tribes in this region that are trying to move to higher ground. Now that is real, that is real. That is an actual impact that's being felt on the ground today. And so while they're, I look at part of my job is to try to tell that story. Because while there may be, politics at play and there may be questioning of the science, you cannot question the impact that they're feeling. Not to mention the threat of tsunami, but just I visited a Head Start center at the Quileute Reservation. And anyone in this room could throw a rock twice and land it in the Pacific Ocean, as they've seen the ocean encroach. They've had, the premise of a 100-year flood, a flood that's so bad it should happen once every 100 years. They've had 4 in the last 7.
We can go on to the next question, or Senator Sullivan, did you have anything?
Well, look, I'll give a little more kind of basic answer. I agree with Derek about kind of looking at local issues that gain common understanding and common agreement on. Keeping a healthy fishery certainly is incredibly important to me and my constituents. There's 80,000 Alaskans engaged in the fishing community. We like to call ourselves a superpower of seafood. Almost 60% of all the seafood harvested in the United States of America comes from the shores and the waters off the coast of Alaska. So there's a lot of common areas that we agree on. I actually think, though, one of the things that I've learned, and maybe given the Senate it's smaller, but I've certainly in my short career tried to get to know all my colleagues, right? It does matter when you go, Sheldon and I have traveled a number of times together on recess. You go out to dinner, you go out for a drink, you just get to know people as humans. And you don't always have to talk policy, you just get to know your colleagues. And what I've found, when you do that, you build trust, you build respect across the aisle. And you can, and I've done it, you can go to some of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle and just say, look, this is really, really important to me. Might not seem like a big deal to you, but in my state, this really matters, and I need some help on both sides of the aisle on this. Trust me on this. Can you support this? Very basic, right? Kind of basic human trust, friendship, whatever you want to call it. And in my experience, that doesn't always work, but it does work sometimes. And that still happens, right? You don't read about it, but that definitely still happens. So that's another way.
Good. So here's a question, which I think is interesting, particularly given that science itself has become a fairly contested question in Washington nowadays. How can the ocean science community better support you as you work to make good policy decisions based on sound science? Are there actions we can take, information we can better share? And I would add to that, how is that navigated when there are actually disputes over scientific findings happening on a regular basis?
Well, I can start kind of as it relates to oceans, right? I think, you got to fully fund the agencies. So, again, this goes to some of the things we've seen in the president's budget. Senator Hirono and I, and I think almost 30 other senators, you were on it, Sheldon, wrote to the OMB director on NOAA and fully funding NOAA and how important that is for not just science, but rational decision-making. So let me give you just a small example of that. The Magnuson-Stevens Act, which just celebrated its 40th anniversary recently. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. It moved our zone for fishing from 10 to 200 miles, but it very importantly set up these councils that manage the fisheries in different parts of the country. The North Pacific Fisheries Council, which is the one that is in charge of Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. Again, the vast, vast majority of the seafood in America is harvested from that, is by no means perfect, but that's probably considered the best managed, most sustainable fishery on the planet. And the reason it is because the decisions, and a lot of them are tough, right, that are made by the council to limit quotas, to continue to have sustainable fisheries are made by science. They're made by data. And the whole point of the council process is to take politicians who have people come and lobby them, I need a bigger quota here, I need a bigger quota here, and take us out of the process. Leave it to the scientists who give the council their recommendations, and they make the decisions. And where that process hasn't worked, and it hasn't worked everywhere in America, there have been some areas, and again, we're not perfect, but it's a pretty darn strong record, where the different fisheries have been decimated is because the science and the decision-making process have not been based on sustainability. It's been based on other things, sometimes politics. And politicians are not good at saying, how much can we harvest of this stock of seafood, of fish, and make sure in 25 years or 30 years we still have it strong. So to me, data-driven, science-based decision-making on sustainability by the experts, fully funded, is the key.
And so I wanted to ask one question, which is also related. You talked about the potential cuts to NOAA. One of the other things that, again, folks are dealing with right now is how many vacancies we have in the government for some of these decision makers, some of these folks who make these policies. For example, right now, the Washington Post has been tracking how many vacancies there are across the federal government, and 38 out of the 45 Senate-confirmed science positions are still unfilled, and that includes the Undersecretary for Oceans and Atmospheric Commerce, the Deputy Director of the National Science Foundation, you name it. How does it affect, again, your constituents and your operations that there are not people in place, the political appointees, who are often driving the decisions on policies that affect Americans? I'm just curious, has this already cropped up, or is it, as Democrats, are you fine with things being unfilled right now because they're not being unfilled by someone that President Trump has picked, or do you feel like it's impeding some critical decisions? I'm just curious, are there particular positions that you're trying to make sure that someone's in place or someone you can work with?
Well, we're still waiting for a NOAA administrator,
Yeah.
so that's like, hello. And there are so many vacancies that I think it signals that there's something very defective in the personnel office in the White House, unless it's their intention to do damage to the United States government this way. If it's your intention to do damage to the United States government by trashing its revenues and slashing its budgets, then you got to work through Congress. And what we have seen with the so-called skinny budget that the Trump administration opened with is that Republicans and Democrats and Senate and House all got together and agreed on a budget that was pretty sensible. And I'm not even sure the White House was in the room when that agreement was struck. And I don't know how much they're going to be in the room when the September agreement is struck, because we're just operating kind of in different universes. But Congress, with the power of the purse, bicameral and bipartisan, can be a very effective remedy to the spending problem. But we can't appoint anybody to anything. And so that is an issue. And the question we have to begin to face is this incompetence in the personnel office that isn't getting people through? I think we've got 0 U.S. attorneys at this point anywhere in the pipeline. We've got hundreds of offices that don't have anybody even in the pipeline. I mean, it's just piling up. No marshals, I'm on judiciary, so I see a lot of this stuff. Or is this a more nefarious strategy just to try to break the government by having its entire middle management not exist? And that sends a dangerous and lasting signal, because what a lot of these agencies have is people who are career people in that agency and who are real gems, who are heroes, who have worked there when they could have been doing a lot more valuable things to their families personally, and who've worked late, and who have incredible personal knowledge about how to make things happen and how these systems work and how to make different programs serve people well. And when you start sending the signal to those people, we don't value you, you suck, get out, you're part of this stupid deep state that we all hate, some of them are going to buy that and some of them are going to leave, and you can't replace that. So you have the immediate hit of the vacancies. And I've got a friend who said that their kid at the State Department called up and said, guess what? I'm a really big shot now. I'm a direct report to the secretary. Because there are like 4 empty offices in between. So, but there's this lasting thing that unless you believe that the American government is a force for evil, and that you have to come in and fight it, and that we're part of the deep state, and that maybe the Russians are better, I don't know what, you've got to treasure the capability in these career people that has been built up over decades. And if you lose that, you can't fix it by fixing the personnel office in the White House. That stays unfixed for potentially a generation.
So Julia, let me since I'm involved in the personnel process as a senator myself, you might imagine I have a very different view. I don't think that this administration is out to intentionally damage the federal government or the people working at Commerce or the State Department.
So are you going the incompetence route?
Those were the 2 choices, but you can offer a third explanation.
What was this? What did you
Incompetence.
say?
He's basically saying it's either a conspiracy or it's incompetence.
Well, look,
but you can offer a third option.
You can tell Shell and I we get along.
Go with the third
right?
option.
And I don't always respond. But I will say, look, there has been, you can say this is very bipartisan, okay? You can't have it both ways, my good friend, because one of the things that's happened, and it's been made very clear, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have tried to delay the appointment of every single member that we're actually trying to get confirmed. So the Trump administration, it took longer to seat that cabinet than any administration since the administration of George Washington. And it was because, you'll have to ask Sheldon about what the discussions are in the Democratic caucus, but there was the quote-unquote resistance to every single cabinet member. So we took, normally on someone non-controversial, of which there were many, Wilbur Ross, I think, had 80 votes in the Senate. Very important person.
Mattis was fine.
Ryan
Mattis was fine. Kelly was fine. Pompeo was fine.
Zinke.
There was that
Zinke
whole
got-
national security
they were
cohort
not
that got put through at the front.
But even those guys, we essentially had to debate them all week, right? Normally you would have a unanimous consent, get them out of committee, non-controversial, let's vote for them. So we're essentially spent a week on each cabinet official, burning time. And then now there's discussion of the deputy secretaries and the undersecretaries and the assistant secretaries to stick with the resistance to burn time on every single one of them. If your colleagues decide to do that, we will never seat a government. Like, that would be unprecedented. So Wilbur Ross gets in late, delayed, no reason. Well, of course, he wants to pick the people. So I think that right now the Trump administration needs to start filling up the pipeline. But what we need is some cooperation from Sheldon and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to say, hey, we're not going to run the clock for a week on the next deputy secretary or undersecretary or assistant secretary. So you take that message back to Chuck Schumer and company, and we'll start getting people seated in the government. But this is clearly a two-way street, and a lot of the delay and resistance has unfortunately been with my good friend and some of his colleagues. And he knows it. That's why he's not saying it.
I just have.
No, I'm happy to answer. I just don't want to
I have very few
go
things
down
to
that
say.
road any further.
One, I feel very uncomfortable sitting between these two. But I will say how this plays out at the local level. So I'll give you a quick example. Last summer, there was a MOU signed, multiple agencies, federal and state, focused on Puget Sound, to actually have all the oars in the water rowing in the same direction.
Sure.
That only works if there are actually people in those positions to work together. And so it's not just at the highest levels, it's downstream at the regional level where we have mass vacancies, and it's really hard to make progress when there's, I mean, to me, it's not just having people in the positions, it's having competent people who embrace the mission of their agency.
Got it. Okay, we only have 5 minutes, so I'm gonna raise two of the best questions we have left, and you can choose what you want to weigh in on. So one is making fun of the marine debris bill. Again, not my question, but bipartisan support for marine debris is great, but the major stressors for the oceans may be less bipartisan: ocean acidification, overfishing, and nutrient pollution, to name a few. How can Congress work to protect the ocean from these threats? I think there is obviously bipartisan agreement on some of these other issues, as we've seen, whether you're talking about ocean acidification
fishing, for
or overfishing, but maybe we could talk a little about where else there's bipartisan common ground. The second question, which I find interesting, is with so much money in politics nowadays, how do broke millennials like me run for office? And I thought if you had a couple of thoughts for the brave young man or woman sitting who's thinking of getting to do your job, what you think about that. So.
I think you can start, at the local level. It doesn't take a lot of money to run for city council. It doesn't take a lot of money to run for state representative. It doesn't take a lot of money to run for state senator. People run for the Rhode Island House of Representatives with a $1,000 campaign budget, and if you can't raise that through 10 or 15 friends, then maybe maybe that's a message to you about how well you'll do it at the polls. So I think it's doable if there's a match between what you can do and what you can afford and what your aspirations are. And I do think that there's growing support through the Oceans Caucus, and I do want to say that the work that we opened with pirate fishing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We cleared 4 treaties in an afternoon. It took 9 years for the previous 4 treaties the Senate passed to transpire. The next year we did the enforcement statute for those treaties, the Port States Measure statute. We did that by unanimous consent because we had worked through all that. And Dan and his predecessor, Roger Wicker, who was the acting chairman at the time of the Oceans Caucus, just really helped make those things happen. So it's getting there, and behind that has come an explosion of interest now that the treaties are out there in how do you enforce them. So you've got everybody from Vulcan to NOAA to all sorts of NGOs who are trying to figure out how you do wake recognition software off satellite imagery and how you can prolong drones, and all this great stuff has come in behind that, and I think we're going to turn a very big corner on pirate fishing in the next few
What about
years.
something tough like nutrient pollution? That involves farmers, really tough constituencies. That's obviously been a difficult one. We're again seeing the administration take a very different course on that.
I think the
compared
hardest
to
one
previous
actually is
ones.
ocean acidification. That's straight out of the carbon in the atmosphere. Right. That's straight out of the fossil fuel industry's emissions, and that takes you to Citizens United and their refusal to engage, and just like stopping in the middle of the road saying nobody passes.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just going to have to break them on that one.
Senator Sullivan, you have an optimistic counter to
Well, look, I mean,
Mr. Dark?
I actually think Sheldon's exactly right on a lot of the issues that we're part of the question. So we've already done not only the treaties, but then the domestic legislation, the implementation on the pirate fishing, what we call IUU fishing. We're looking, when you want to talk about sustainability of our fisheries, we're looking at a reauthorization, and we're going to start holding hearings on the Magnuson-Stevens Act. That goes directly to the idea of sustainable fisheries and how to update that really important act that, again, from a bipartisan perspective, most people believe has done quite well on the sustainable fisheries issues. I actually think there's a lot of interest. I certainly am, Derek, on the ocean acidification issue. In my 2.5 years in the Senate, I'm not on appropriations, but I've always sent the letters to fully fund the NOAA research on those kind of issues. So even on those kind of issues, I actually think, look, I think one of the things you're seeing here just on this panel is the issue of oceans is something that you're starting to see a lot of bipartisan support for, clean, healthy oceans. And it's not just America, it's other countries. And to be engaged and leading on that, which is what we're trying to do, I think there's a lot of upside, much more avenues for cooperation and achievement in this important area than there are downsides. So that's why I'm so optimistic, and that's why Sheldon and I are working on so many things together in the Senate on this.
So I want to touch on the second question, and I'll say up front, I don't presume the partisan makeup of the people in the audience. I think there are actually bipartisan things that we can work on in this domain. At the same time, there are going to be things, elections have consequences. Having said that, while this Congress may try to pass some bad laws and repeal some good ones, it can't repeal the laws of physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right? As you see this Congress engage on things that may move in the wrong direction, that's an opportunity for all of us as citizens to be engaged. And whether that be being engaged as a candidate for public office or getting involved in a NGO that's trying to move things in the right direction, or whether it be, as one of the organizations here in town did last night, having a viewing of the movie Chasing Coral, which was amazing. And I think it should be required viewing for every member of Congress and every citizen of the planet. I'm a big believer in what Lincoln said. Lincoln said public sentiment is everything. And part of our job, not just as elected officials, but part of our job as citizens is to be engaged and to make sure our voices are heard in this process, whether you're a candidate for office or, as John F. Kennedy said, in a democracy, each of us holds office. In a democracy, we the people are the boss.
Excellent. Well, that's a great place to end. Please join me in thanking our members of Congress.
Thank you, Senator.
All right, yeah, good job, Derek.
I think she's going to.
So very much. No, I just want to say it's a big thank you to Senator Sullivan, Representative Kilmer, Senator Whitehouse, and Juliet for what was a fantastic panel to end day 2. And Senator Sullivan, I want to pick up on the points you made. There's a lot of bipartisan effort and work taking place for our oceans, so we're really looking forward to continuing that effort. So thank you very much.
And I think we all send all of you a big thank you for the work that each and every one of you is doing on our oceans. So there's another bipartisan sentiment to close on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for doing it. Always good.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, Juliet.
Thanks, of course.